Okay, we're talking to Angela Minicuci today. Angela's a partner at Martin Waymeyer, a PR and digital marketing agency in Lansing, Michigan. She's accredited in public relations and certified in crisis communications. So today we're talking about a specific crisis communications sort of case study that she helped handle. And Angela, welcome.
Thanks for having me, John. Good to talk to you.
Yeah. So you and I go back I don't know, several years. We've worked together on a lot of sort of public sort of, how would you describe that? Like statewide sort of,
Public education advocacy campaigns,
yeah.
probably about almost a decade now. Just mostly around the health world because that's where I spent the bulk of my career before coming to Martin Waymeyer, and even now, a lot of my clients are healthcare focused.
hmm Okay, so tell me about there was one particular public health crisis in Michigan. I don't, maybe people have heard of.
Yeah,
So
probably,
tell us about that.
possibly. Well, there's always a public health crisis in Michigan. I mean, if it's not one thing, it's another. But I spent the bulk of my career was spent at the State Health Department of Michigan, and during my time there is when the Flint water crisis occurred. So that was exactly 10 years ago now. And I was at the Michigan Department of Community Health, which was also going through the transition to what it's now known as the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And that particular crisis also involved everyone up from the or down from the governor's office to a handful of other state agencies and then local government units as well.
So for people maybe who don't read the news or anything, what is the Flint water crisis?
So about 10 years ago, right now, there was an emergency manager in place that made a decision to switch the city of Flint's water source. And as a result of that, the water pipes that were being used to direct water were lead pipes. And there was not much known about the impact of lead on public health at the time, and truly how pervasive it can be in municipal water systems. And so that decision to switch the source ultimately became what is now known as the Flint water crisis, where we had an entire city whose water supply, their drinking water, the water they used for cooking and bathing in their homes, was contaminated by these pipes that were just leaching lead into water. And lead is typically associated with environmental or home disease or illness, I should say, from like a paint perspective. So water
hmm
isn't something people typically look to for contamination with. And so we ended up seeing shortly after, within months of the water switching, there were discoloration, smells, funny taste with the water, and eventually an increase in lead in the blood supply of the people that live there. So when you start to have lead contamination in blood, that's when you start to see impacts on people's health, and in particular in children. That's a big concern with children because it has potential developmental implications down the line. So that crisis unfolded over the course of a couple of years. And now here we are 10 years later. And while the pipes have been replaced, there's still some lingering issues in the city that many residents are still dealing with and wary of as a result of that crisis.
So tell me about, like, what was your role in that? And then like what kind of learnings came out of that about how to manage crisis communications like that?
Yeah, so my role at the time, I was essentially spokesperson for the Michigan Department of Community Health, the health department involved in overseeing people's health at the time. There was also other agencies involved, state agencies that oversaw water supply. So we weren't involved in the decision making and or kind of monitoring of the water system, but we did collect and had information around blood lead levels. And so that's when we really got involved, is when there was a notice that there was a potential implication with how the water may be changing blood lead levels in children. And so my role was really to get involved at the point in which Dr. Monahana Atisha came forward with her data that showed that there was, at the municipal level, the zip code level, some issues with increases of lead levels in children. And at the state, we usually don't get down to zip code level. It's municipality insofar as maybe a county goes. So
Hmm.
we weren't actively monitoring and didn't see that level of increase as quickly as a local pediatrician could. And so what I would say some of the biggest takeaways that someone in a communications role could learn from like a crisis communications perspective is to really pay attention to all stakeholders and what they're seeing from their unique vantage point, and really do the deep dive on either the data or the research or the evidence that they have, to see that what you have is actually accurate and that it's not maybe missing a bigger picture or a smaller picture even. So when we at the state health department were made aware of her data, we did an analysis at the same zip code level, and we ultimately saw what she saw. And so that then put into place the entire motion of the response of getting bottled water, getting people off of using the water source to their home, and hopefully remedying the contamination that was pervasive throughout the entire city.
So what was like the first step in getting that switch to happen? Like telling people not to drink the water and switching to bottled water? Was it like, what were the communication channels?
So from my role, we got involved in about September, October, after the water was switched of 2014, and that was months after there had been some public notice involving other state agencies and governmental units about the color, the taste, the concerns around the water supply having been switched, and so once we did the analysis of the blood lead data at the local municipal zip code level, I was right there when we made the phone calls to notify our sister agencies, the elected offices, that there is indeed an issue that we're seeing in the data. And we need to get bottled water out to people as quickly as possible. So, from the health perspective, it was getting the notice around to all the appropriate state involved agencies that this is a problem. We see what the data is showing at the local level now that we have this kind of smaller scale analysis done, and we need to get water out as soon as possible. So it started with water, bottled water. It eventually, and this was not a health department led role, but eventually turned into removing the lead pipes and getting those out of the city. But also, if you think about how water is used in the city, I mean, we use water to grow our fruits and vegetables. So anyone that's in the community of Flint and using that to maybe grow some local produce, that's a problem. And so the food bank got involved in making sure that there was nutritious foods available that weren't contaminated. I mean, it was just a very large scale production outside of just making sure people had access to clean water.
Mm-hmm.
Filters were a big part of getting people access to water as well. There's only so much you can do with getting plastic bottles into home, and then possibly having environmental implications that come out of that. So filters were a large initiative in the first year or so, getting those onto faucets so that people could use their water safely. And then from there, I think it was and it continues to be an active monitoring process of those that did have elevated levels of lead in their blood, and just making sure that they had the proper medical and developmental supports in place as they grow, because these are young children that we're talking about, so that they could have as immediate attention as possible if issues pop up.
Yeah. Wow. Um, that's crazy. And then it made it all the way to I mean, obviously to the national level, because I remember President Obama drinking a glass of water, at some, I don't know, press conference, just
Yeah.
something to show that, like, fix the problem.
It
Uh,
did. And, I think it's also very interesting when you think about the intersection between a governmental unit and an elected official. And that was a very interesting case study from the perspective of a lot of the decisions that led to the water change were the result of decisions being made from a political perspective, Government is non-political. Government, if you work in a government agency, you are nonpartisan. You are beholden to all taxpayers.
Hmm.
But our budgets are set. The way that we work is very much politically directed, and so it was a interesting line to walk to see how you get to making sure that things are being done well from a public health and environmental perspective, but also knowing that there are these personalities and political party maybe ideals or platforms that are also influencing the direction of the work and ultimately the outcomes.
Yeah. So, obviously our audience is higher ed, and I know that, you guys had I mean, in Lansing, there was the shooting on MSU's campus. Um, stuff like that is like a unfortunately a pattern in America, and probably other things. So like what what advice would you give to a higher ed, Marcom leader that's watching this, about how they can best handle these types of dramatic situations that happen on campus, not
Yeah.
necessarily just a shooting, but like, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean that was right here in our backyard. I heard the sirens from my house at night. It was very real, and unfortunately, it's happening in far too many communities right now. But I think, in the moment, the best thing to do is to as much as you possibly can be involved in the decision making as quickly as possible from a communications perspective, because you get to be the voice for those audience members within the community, whether it's a shooting or another crisis, outside of the organization, right? So the role of a public relations practitioner is, or a communications person in general, is to ensure that the publics are accounted for, the audiences, your target audiences, your the key or groups that your organization works with, that their voice is heard and their concerns are what is driving the decision making process. One of the things that is incredibly true, and yet it is the most difficult thing for an organization in the midst of a crisis, is the fact that oftentimes a crisis is being navigated and the decisions are being made from the perspective of how do we protect our organization. And
Hmm.
ultimately that proves to be the biggest pitfall when decisions start to go wrong. The right perspective and the role that a communications person can play when navigating a crisis is the perspective of those that you serve, and how you can best support them in whatever the crisis is that you're navigating. What are their needs? What are they expecting of you? And using that to guide decision making. And that is, I think, very similar to Flint. That is ultimately what kind of changes the trajectory of kind of the where the buck stops and their career path, right? So oftentimes it's the CEO, the head of an organization, possibly someone who is put in a position by an elected official or is an elected official, because if you aren't making good decisions to navigate the next steps throughout that crisis, they look to those at the top, the ones that were ultimately making those decisions, and that's who ultimately is held accountable.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been really informative, and great to catch up with you as well. So I know that Martin Waymeyer, where you're from, is they you guys do some higher ed work. You want to give us a little pitch for Martin Waymeyer?
We do, yeah. So we do a lot of public relations and digital marketing work within the public policy space. So a lot we talk about advocacy really being the foundation of the work that we do, and there is a lot to advocate for around higher ed. So we work with a number of uh, the state's major universities through the University Research Corridor, which is basically the research arm of all of the state's major universities. The state's top major research universities, so Wayne State, U of M, and Michigan State University.
Hmm.
And then we also work with MASU, the Michigan Association of State Universities. So we work with all technically 15 state universities from there. And we've done some other work just advocating on behalf of college students and making sure that we're keeping their needs top of mind in the public policy space. And there's certainly not a shortage of that at the national level right now as we start to navigate how we're going to pay off student loans, hopefully,
Hmm.
and make the process a little easier for people that are through college or considering it down the line. But a lot of what we come down to from a Martin Waymeyer perspective and the clients that we choose to work with are those that are just trying to do better for the people that they serve. And that's so true for crisis communications, is just how can we help advance an issue or support a group of people in a way that's going to have a better outcome for them in the long term. And so there's a lot of that in the higher ed space. There's a lot of it in pretty much any public policy that becomes an issue. Right now, we're looking at having a completely Democratic controlled legislature in Michigan, and that means there are things popping up that are priorities that haven't been for decades. So we try to be a part of those big picture issues that will ultimately help move Michigan forward in the best way possible.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for being on here. And where can people connect with you if they if they have questions or want to work with Martin Waymeyer?
So martinwaymire.com, martinwaymire.com. You can find all of our contact information right there. We're also on social media, and my email's right up there. So I'm not going to bother trying to get people to memorize Angela Minicuci. Minicucci is not the easiest name to spell, but
Just
Martin
take a
Waymire
stab
seems
at
to
it.
be
Like,
just a little easier.
yeah, just sound it out in like LinkedIn or something. See
There's
what
usually an
happens.
extra C thrown in somewhere. Maybe an R has come up from time to time. I don't know how, but yeah.
Yeah, some people have trouble with Azoni, and like it's 5 letters, but they'll throw all these N's in there, Anzananzi or something like that, and I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, where'd you get all these extra consonants?
Yep. I get it.
Yeah. All
All
right, cool.
right.
Thanks for
Thanks for
being
having
here.
me, John. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll end.